I'd like to take a moment and discuss codes and zoning regulations, because many of the prints that we will be looking at will discuss things such as codes and zoning, or may be designed to meet certain codes or zoning regulations. So let's talk first about a building code. The building code is going to regulate things like life safety, fire safety, structural safety, health and welfare, property protection, and life safety would include safety regulations that are not related to fire or the structure, such as guardrail height and configuration, handrail dimensions and clearances, stair treads and riser ratios, ratio of stair tread to riser, and the uniformity. And this comes under life safety because the height of the guardrail would have no effect on the fire or the structural stability of the building. So let's look at this issue of stair risers. We can see here the tread. This is what's defined as the tread of the stair. The riser is the vertical change in elevation. And so we are looking at the ratio between the tread and the riser. And for print reading, we have to be aware that sometimes a tread might be referred to simply by the letter T, and riser might be referred to by the letter R. So how does that work? Let's take a look at this drawing from commercial building. We see here that the stairs are defined 11 TR at 9 inches equals 8 feet 3 inches. Well, that TR is the same as the T for tread. So we have 11 treads 9 inches deep, totaling a horizontal distance of 8 feet 3 inches. But what is the height of the riser? They're not called out. Well, if you count them, you see there are 15 steps to this level, which is labeled as 9 feet 6 inches. And so if we divide 9 feet 6 inches by 15, we find that each riser is 7.5 inches tall. We also see that the clearance from the upper floor to the top of the tread is a minimum of 7 feet. So how does that compare to a building code? Well, looking at the Ohio Building Code based on the International Building Code of 2006, we see that stairways require a minimum clearance of 80 inches, or roughly 6 feet 8 inches. Well, we have just seen that the clearance is 7 feet. So the stairway would meet this part of the code. We're told that the risers can be a maximum of 7 inches high and a minimum of 4 inches high. So our 7.5 inches would be too tall. Treads have to be a minimum of 11 inches. And our treads are 9 inches, so they are too small. So in those two areas, the commercial building would not meet the Ohio Building Code. The code also requires that the width of stairways be a minimum of 36 inches wide. But if the occupancy of the building is going to be greater than 50, you have to have at least 44 inches. Now, the drawing we just looked at did not show us what the width was, so we can't compare. But those are some of the things that we would look at in a building code. Some other code objectives would be fire safety. We're talking about the construction and the resistance of the materials to fire. Certain types of building construction, fire rating, the ability of a partition to prevent the spread of fire. Smoke protection, either preventing smoke, evacuating smoke, or alerting people to smoke. Means of egress. If there is a fire or an emergency, what is the quickest way out of the building? So some historical precedents, we go all the way back to 64 AD in the burning of Rome, when it was rebuilt with non-combustible materials. The Great Fire of London in 1666 resulted in more stringent building regulations when it was rebuilt. And also the Baltimore Fire of 1858 led to the first Baltimore building code in the following year. The Chicago Fire of 1878 created its first building code 4 years later. And in 1905, the National Board of Fire Underwriters created the first model building code for the United States. Now, an underwriter is an individual who evaluates risk and exposure for the purposes of issuing insurance. So you can see that the people who write insurance are going to be interested in the buildings being safer for fire to limit the payouts. Then there was the Iroquois Theater Fire of 1903, also in Chicago. It was the worst U.S. fire in history, where over 600 people died, and it resulted in the elimination of SRO, or standing room only. Once upon a time, standing room only was a real thing and not just an expression to indicate a very popular theater activity. It led to the creation of panic doors. The doors you see on the buildings here in the college have a bar on it that all you have to do is hit it and the door will open for you. You don't have to turn a knob. That's known as a panic door. And it required that all theater exits had to be clearly marked. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory of 1911 was the deadliest industrial fire in New York's history, where 146 people died. It led to better building access and egress, access for firefighters to get into the building. It led to fireproofing requirements, the availability of and requirement of fire extinguishers, and the installation of alarm systems and automatic sprinklers. And then finally, the Coconut Grove Fire of 1942 was the deadliest U.S. nightclub fire in history, and 492 people died. It led to the prohibition of flammable decorations, inward swinging exit doors. There was a requirement that exit signs had to be visible at all times. Recall that the Iroquois Fire resulted in the requirement of marking of exits, but they did not have any illumination. So with exit signs being visible at all times, it led to the independent sources of electricity to feed them so that they could be easily readable in thick smoke. Revolving doors had to permit free-flowing traffic in a panic situation, and it required that no emergency exits be chained or bolted. Some other objectives of a building code will be structural safety. That's most of the regulations in a building code. Health and welfare, such as lighting, ventilation, sanitation, indoor climate control, noise control. Property protection, the durability of materials, the material and construction standards, they are all embedded in the code. One thing the code does not cover is the appearance of the building, and that's covered by zoning. So a zoning ordinance or a zoning regulation or zoning code, it regulates the use of land under the jurisdiction of a municipality, some governmental subdivision, according to a comprehensive master plan. Now, that may be a stretch. Some localities do not have a comprehensive master plan. But it divides land into different groups, and those are typically things like residential, commercial, industrial, or special purpose. The idea is that I do not want a factory right next door to housing or commercial mixed in with factories. The groups can be subdivided. The document is going to include a map. It's going to include a text explaining it. We may subdivide. For example, here's a single-family residential with 15,000 square foot lots, all the way down to a single-family residential on 5,600 square foot lots. We have two-family residential, multiple family, apartment districts. These are all residential districts of different types. Special purpose might be something like an airport that it lists various regulations that can be done in and around an airport, such as height restrictions. The text is going to describe the different types of land uses. Any development standards, such as ground coverage, how much the building can occupy of a particular property, maximum floor area that is allowed for a building per floor or per lot, the maximum height of the building or the number of stories. The two are not necessarily equal. So I can have multiple stories and exceed the maximum height. Minimum setbacks, how far from the property line or from a street can a building be, and how high can it be further back? In other words, a building that is 35 feet from the property line can be 35 feet tall. If I want to go taller, I have to go further back from the property line. Those kinds of things are explained. Sometimes other standards are included in these development standards, such as the number of parking spaces. Or in some cases, in historical neighborhoods, there may be requirements for colors of roofing, asphalt shingles, or the style in which you can make modifications to your home because of the historical nature. And then there will also be a description of the administrative process. So that ends the presentation on codes and zoning regulations. If you take CNST 2131, we will get into it in a little bit more detail, but it's important to understand how these affect the drawings that you will be reviewing and what it means to your project.